So, greetings and merry meet. I am Dr. Kathryn Bingham, founder of Leadistics, a veteran and woman-owned small business that serves the needs of executives, entrepreneurs, and professionals to elevate their leadership. And I'm also the author of the newly released Driving Pink. So today, my guest is Mark Miller, the Vice President of High Performance Leadership at Chick-fil-A and author of 9 books, including some of my favorites in the leadership genre, with over 1 million copies in print in 25 languages. So we're going to talk about Mark's latest book, Smart Leadership, which you can see over my shoulder here in the image. Smart Leadership, 4 Simple Choices to Scale Your Impact. And Mark, I also love that you share that you teach, coach, and serve nonprofits around the world, because I believe that this idea of smart leadership is more than just the sphere of influence. We can grow our impact beyond what we think we can influence if we use this concept of smart leadership. So welcome and thank you for sharing some time today.
Well, it's my pleasure to be with you. Can't wait.
Awesome. So maybe you can start us out by describing some of the experiences in your own journey that led to this idea of smart leadership.
Okay, so it's a long story. I'll do my very best to boil it down to its essence. I started selling chicken over 40 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I was a team member in a local Chick-fil-A restaurant, but I was awful in the restaurant, just awful. And so I made a strategic career decision, which this is not career advice to anybody who's listening, but I felt like I was going to be fired any day. So I made the decision to quit. Again, this made perfect sense to me as a teenager. Again, not recommended you try this at home, because I thought it would look better on my resume to have quit than to have been fired.
Ah.
And I went off and got another job, and 6 months later, I got laid off. And I'm thinking, I need a job. So I made the decision, again, another brilliant stroke of career management. I said, I can't work in the Chick-fil-A restaurant. Maybe I can work at the home office, which of course makes no sense and would be no reflection on the other professionals at the home office. But I walked in and said, I'd like a job working in your warehouse. The receptionist told me to have a seat. And just a few minutes later, Truett Cathy, the founder of Chick-fil-A, came and took me into his office to conduct that interview, which again makes no sense at many levels. But I learned that I was actually trying to become the 16th corporate staff member. Mm-hmm. And so when you've only got 15 employees, I'm assuming the man or woman in charge is going to do those interviews. And so I tell people it was a combination of God's grace and lack of discernment on Truett's part that he gave me that job working in the warehouse over 40 years ago. And so I've worked all over the business over those many years. And about almost 25 years ago, we realized that our leadership bench was not strong. Mm-hmm. And I don't know about your listeners, but what I've seen in my experience is when you have an opportunity to solve, mm-hmm. An opportunity to seize or a problem to solve, you put a leader on it. And we looked over our shoulder and we were going, well, I think she'll be ready soon. I hope he can lead someday. But we didn't have leaders ready. And of course, what do you do in that situation? You give those problems and opportunities to existing leaders, which is a great short-term answer, but it is a horrible long-term answer.
Right.
And so I was asked to try and help solve that problem for the organization. And I assembled a really smart team of people. And I said, we've got to figure out how to accelerate leadership development. And that was about 25 years ago. And what I did not anticipate is that would be the focus of the rest of my career. I was asked shortly thereafter to begin investing 90 to 95% of my time helping leaders grow. And so That's what I've done. We try to look for current and emerging problems, issues, and opportunities, and we try to figure out how we can add value. And so on this question of smart leadership, a few years ago, prior to the pandemic, as we looked at current and near-term realities, we saw a lot of leaders struggling, not just in our organization, but I've had the privilege and opportunity to work with leaders around the world. And we seem to see a growing level of frustration and stress and anxiety, and a lot of leaders that weren't living up to their full potential. And so that was the problem that our team set out to tackle. And we didn't know what to call it in the beginning. So we just broadly and loosely labeled it, how do you help leaders improve their effectiveness? We'd done plenty of other resources over the years that would actually teach the fundamentals and the basic skills and concepts of leadership. We said, we don't think this is about teaching leadership. We think this is about liberating leaders to be more effective. And so that was the short version of a long story, how we landed on the research project that became Smart Leadership.
I love the term liberating leaders, because you begin the book with this concept of the quicksand, right? And I thought it was really interesting because you talk about, well, if we're in the quicksand, and I'll let you describe a little more about what that is, but we have options of learning to swim, give up or die, or escape, right? And it was hilarious when I was reading this, and I'm like, where am I? Where am I? And there's lots of stories I could tell about where, the quicksand for me. And the truth is, sometimes when you're mired in the quicksand, you don't even see the option of escape. I mean, it doesn't even come to you. So you're thinking your only options are learn to swim or just die. You're going to die trying. And we forget that sometimes we have these other options, these liberating opportunities to free ourselves from whatever we are mired in. And so why do you, when you think about this idea of the quicksand, what is it, and how do we help ourselves understand where we are so that we can, in fact, escape?
Okay, that's a great setup. So when we started the work, we were, as I said, chasing this idea of helping leaders be more effective. So the problem solvers in us went to, well, what are the barriers? And what are the obstacles to higher levels of effectiveness, which we later began to think of in terms of impact. And we had no shortage of candidates. We saw busyness, we saw distractions, we saw complexities. Again, the numbers, even pre-pandemic, were staggering. We learned that over 2,600 times a day, the typical American is tapping, swiping, or liking something on their phone. We learned that over 346,000 hours of YouTube content is uploaded every day. That's why we can't watch all the cat videos. It's raining cat videos, right?
There's so many cat videos.
And distractions. Again, pre-pandemic, and we think the pandemic has just exacerbated everything I'm talking about here, even though it's probably too close to have credible numbers. But pre-pandemic, the research indicated that on average, the typical office worker was interrupted every 3 minutes.
I believe
of course, people go, well, yeah, I understand that. And what do? Well, you cope and you go with it. Well, okay, I got that. That's probably the pragmatic response. Here's the dark side of that. The psychologists tell us that on average, it takes 20 minutes to regain the focus and mental acuity that we had prior to the distraction. So if you're interrupted every 3 minutes, the reality is you get to the end of the day and you've never had the level of focus and acuity that you had when you walked in the door. And so you've worked all day in this impaired state just based on the distractions. So we began to compile this long list of elements that were in the quicksand. We said, okay, this is what we got to solve. And so we started talking to leaders about the things I just mentioned to you. And one of the very first leaders we talked to said, well, I hear all that, but that's not my problem. I said, okay, great. I mean, good for you.
Awesome.
I said, is there anything holding you back? are there any barriers or obstacles or impediments that you believe are keeping you from leading to your full potential? And they said, oh yeah. I said, well, what have you got? They said fear. They said fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
They said aimlessness. We even talked to leaders that said success. And we said, wow, okay, so what do we do with all that? We said, well, let's just put it all in a big bucket called quicksand, because in the natural world, quicksand is a very simple recipe. But what we were learning is that in the lives of leaders, everybody has their own unique blend of the things that are holding them back. And so, as you already referenced, we said, okay, all right, we've just got a bigger bucket of quicksand. Let's figure out how to help people deal with the quicksand. And then we discovered, what do leaders do when they're in it? And they either sink, right, give up, which we hope nobody does that. I mean, they actually die. Now, maybe not physically, but their hopes and dreams and aspirations are extinguished.
Yes.
So from a leadership perspective, they're done, right? Their influence is diminished or negated. Well, we don't want anybody to do that. So the second category you referenced, a lot of leaders have said, well, I'm just going to swim in it. Escape is not even an option. I'm going to just swim in it, because the men and women in leadership, you would argue many of them actually know how to lead. So they just keep going through the motions, right? Stroke, breathe, kick. A couple of fundamental problems. One is it's exhausting to swim in quicksand. And if you do it long enough, there's a good chance you're going to end up in that first category and you're just going to quit. I mean, we keep hearing about the great resignation, and some people are putting a very positive spin on it. And they're saying it's men and women who have discovered during the pandemic a more noble calling, and they're not going to do the day-to-day mundane. And there's probably some of that. I think a lot of people participating in the great resignation, they're exhausted. And they're in that category. They're just quitting. They're just giving up. They're just choosing to sink, right? So we don't want people to sink. We don't really want leaders to swim. You're never going to win a gold medal swimming in quicksand. You'll never reach your full potential. Even if you can muster the strength, the courage, and the will to keep swimming, your leadership is just a shadow of what it could be. Well, that led us to the third category. What if you could escape? And so we turned our attention to leaders who either seem to have this knack for staying out of quicksand, or had developed the ability once in it to get out. And so those are the leaders we called the smart leaders, and they're the ones that we wanted to learn from, and we ultimately wrote the book about.
So in writing the book, you could have picked 6, you could have picked 5, but you have 4 choices. We have the idea of confronting reality, growing capacity, fueling curiosity. I have another comment about that one when we get there. And creating change, positive change, obviously. How do you envision that leaders begin this process? And can you tell us just a little bit about each of those so that people can understand what their options are for making these smart choices?
Sure. Well, let's start with the idea of choices. We really didn't know what to do with what we were finding. And I had a really gifted team of researchers. We worked months and months. I guess we probably almost worked a couple of years, closing in on 2 years, trying to figure this out. And once these patterns began to emerge of the men and women who I've already referenced, who either didn't go there, or when they did end up in it, they got out pretty quickly. And so they became our focus. But we were really struggling with, what is it they do? And we continued to see these tactical manifestations, which we will reference a few of them. That's what we talk about in the book. But we said, what's driving these tactics? Because the tactics are actually very approachable. Every leader on the planet can do these things, but the vast majority don't. So we said, we need to go upstream. And what we concluded is that the tactics we'll discuss are the natural extension of choices, And we ended up calling these smart choices. Some of your listeners may know that human beings make between 30 and 35,000 remotely conscious choices a day. Mm-hmm. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a very short list of choices that require a little more focus, a little more intentionality, but they yield a disproportionate return. Think of them like keystone choices. They create a positive ripple effect. And the way we came up with 4 is that's actually how all of this input self-organized. I mean, we could have disaggregated it into 10 or 12, but it seemed to logically and simply fit within these 4. Now, let me quickly add, when somebody thinks through this at the conceptual level, they're going to say, well, you might actually make more than 4 smart choices a day. Well, you might.
Could be.
You might. And some days you will, right? You might argue, where am I going to go to college? If I'm a young person, that might be a smart choice, one that requires a little more time, energy, and effort and has a disproportionate return. But many of those choices are singular or a point in time. These are choices. These 4 are choices that you need to make over and over and over and over again. Again, not an exhaustive list, but we believe these are 4 that will help a leader step out of the quicksand. So I'll give them to you really quick. You've already referenced them. The first choice is to confront reality. So here's the deal. I've asked a lot of leaders. I was with 300 leaders this week. And my question is always, I've learned how to ask this question. Do you know a leader that at some point in their life has failed to confront reality? And everybody's hand goes up, because I don't want to ask them about times that you have failed to confront reality. That's too personal. It's too soon. I'll let you deal with that. But when you talk to people about that, we all know leaders who fail to confront reality, and it's never good. Yes. And we can speculate on many, many, many reasons that leaders fail to confront reality. The smart leaders make a choice to confront reality. They understand that they need to be grounded in truth, and that enables them to lead from a position of strength. It doesn't mean we're always going to like the truth. It doesn't mean that sometimes the truth, we need to go about changing what is currently true. But if you'll confront reality, that's a great foundation to be a smart leader and to scale your impact. So I don't know if we'll come back, maybe talk about some tactics. You want me just to hit these really quick?
Why don't we talk about them really quickly, and then we'll come back. In fact, I might even, here's my notes, like 8 pages, 10 pages of notes from the book. So we might hit on 1 or 2 from there.
Maybe a tactic or 2 at the end. Let me do that. But that is one thing that these choices, the tactics are almost obvious. I don't mean they're easy. But once you decide you're going to choose to confront reality, there's some things you can do to activate that choice, right? The choice is the prerequisite to action and transformation, but it starts with the choice.
Exactly.
So that's the first. The second choice is to grow capacity. And this one feels counterintuitive and maybe even like blasphemy to men and women in quicksand. It's like, if I had capacity, I wouldn't be in quicksand. Like, have you lost your mind? Maybe, but the data was really clear. We talked to scores and scores of leaders who have figured out how to grow capacity, which is part of their escape plan. It's part of their escape plan, because you need capacity to meet the demands of today and the challenges of tomorrow. Exactly. And so there are any number of tactics that you can employ, but you got to make that choice. As counterintuitive and as hard as it sounds, yes, I know you're in quicksand, and I got it, and I've been there, and you're probably fearful, and you may feel lonely, and you may feel isolated, and you might even feel helpless. Capacity is one of those stepping stones. You got to have some capacity. That's a smart choice. The third smart choice is to fuel curiosity. People have often asked me in one form or another over the years, is there a leadership fountain of youth? Well, my answer for decades has been, I hope so, because I'm looking for it myself. I want to add value to my last breath, but I didn't know. I felt like Ponce de Leon. I'm looking. There's got to be a fountain of youth out there somewhere. Well, now I have full confidence to say there is a fountain of youth for leaders, and it's curiosity. It's curiosity. It's how you maintain relevance and vitality in a changing world. That's the third choice. The world wars against curiosity.
Yes.
Smart leaders,
even
they're
our
going to step
brain
up.
our brain
Yeah.
likes the status quo, so we have to
Absolutely.
be intentional about being curious.
Right. Our brains are self-optimizing memory systems, and they're going to default to what is known.
Exactly.
That is the way that our brains are created. But we have the capacity to tinker with that hardwiring, and curiosity is one of those mechanisms. And the fourth choice is to choose to create change. Now, I actually have told people I don't have a lot of insight here, but I think the insight is that it's one of the choices, because I know leaders who actually make those first three choices and they've got little or no impact in the world. Like, well, how can that be? Well, because leaders create change. They create positive, strategic, sustainable change. At least the good leaders do. See, some leaders look at change as a nuisance, as an inconvenience. And I'm saying, no. That's your job. You're supposed to create change. You're supposed to move people and organizations from here to there. You're supposed to increase market share. You're supposed to increase sales. You're supposed to increase retention. All these things you're supposed to improve over time. You're supposed to build and sustain a culture, which by definition involves adaptation, right? To be sure that it maintains relevance in a changing world. So this last choice may be the most obvious of all, but it is a common refrain. The best leaders choose to create change. The first three choices enable that, but they're no substitute for it.
Exactly.
Those are the four choices.
Exactly. When I look at the book and I think about some of the advice that's in there, one of my favorite connections, I have many, as you saw from my notes, but that many leaders fail to grow not for lack of energy or desire, but inadequate focus and accountability. And then my linkage was another snippet that said, an outstanding plan is trash if you don't execute it. So as you think about how leaders might read the book and then execute, what are some of the recommendations that you might make for them to take what they learn and then create a plan that they really can work on?
Okay, so I got two thoughts. I'll confine my remarks to two thoughts, and then we'll go where you want to go. First is you don't have to try and boil the ocean, right? I mean, you may feel like, man, I'm in such quicksand, I need to do 1,000 things. Well, ultimately, over the rest of your career, you may need to do 1,000 things, but let's start small. Let's start actionable. And I'm not necessarily suggesting these are in priority order, but let me give you a tactic to go with each choice.
Okay.
So first, if you're going to choose to confront reality, you probably need to find some fresh eyes. It's really hard for us, most human beings, to really see reality in its full glory. And so I encourage people, get others to help you define reality so that you can, in fact, confront it. And maybe this is a personal board of directors. Maybe these are coaches. Maybe these are mentors. Maybe these are consultants. Good consultants, in my experience, are the ones that are willing to tell you the truth. The lousy consultants are the ones that tell you what you want to hear.
Exactly.
You've heard the old thing about they borrow your watch to tell you what time it is. I don't need those kind of consultants. I need men and women who can tell me the truth and then help me respond appropriately, respond accordingly to what is true, what is the reality. I'll give you one more idea. This fresh eyes thing. I am in a group that we started 23 years ago. We meet twice a month, and we've been studying leadership for 23 years. And we typically meet for 2.5 to 3 hours twice a month for 23 years. And our focus is on how we can grow our leadership and our influence and our impact on the world, but we provide fresh eyes for each other. One of our disciplines for a couple of decades is we share our personal development plans with the group while they're in draft form to get feedback. And then we'll share the finished draft with the group for accountability. So you don't have to do this alone. This whole idea of confronting reality, it's like it can be daunting. It can be overwhelming. And then one more way to put a point on that is maybe pick an area where you want to confront reality. Maybe it's your leadership. Maybe it's your leadership team. How good and how strong are they? You need to do a real assessment there. Maybe it's your health. Maybe it's your finances. Maybe it's your relationships. I mean, there are any number of areas that it's going to be extremely beneficial for us as leaders to confront reality. Pick one, get some fresh eyes if you need to, and then you can decide what to do with what you've discovered. So those are my top line thoughts as far as some tactical things that leaders can do. So let's go to the second, which is grow capacity. And I may not be able to confine this to one idea, but there's some that are so obvious, I can just mention them for you. One is you need to figure out how to grow your personal capacity. Well, is that not fixed? It is certainly not fixed. Now, it's not infinite, but it's not fixed. And it's really simple stuff that's challenging for most of us to do. Diet, exercise, rest, fluids, relationships, recreation. I challenge leaders. I said, you got a plan for everything. Do you have a plan for personal energy management? That's one way to grow your capacity, because I do know leaders that know how to lead. They just don't have the energy to do it. Well, then they need to work on that. So that's one, but that's kind of simple, straightforward, not easy, but pretty simple. Another is your time. Is every minute that you can eliminate from on your calendar is a minute of capacity that you've reclaimed. Some of your audience will know the name of Peter Drucker. I think the greatest management and leadership thinker of the last 2,000 years. And he wrote 50 years ago that he had never met a knowledge worker, which if you explore his definition, we all fit that. He said he's never met a knowledge worker that couldn't eliminate 25% of the items on their calendar with no ill effect. Now, I don't know if that's our number. I don't know if that's your number. But again, what if you eliminated an hour or 2 hours or 5 hours of activity that's currently on your calendar? You're growing capacity. So again, time is one of those easy ones until you've cleaned up your calendar, and then that's no longer a source of capacity. Then the challenge becomes keeping your calendar clean, which I would argue is a never-ending challenge. But let me give you one more. And I would argue on your behalf as a listener that this is the most controversial thing in the whole book. But the leaders who are really serious about growing capacity, they embrace the concept of margin.
That was going to be my absolutely.
So here's the deal. Talking to somebody in quicksand about margin is like offering a drowning person swimming lessons. Like nobody in quicksand wants to hear it. But here, the research was staggering on this. Do what?
It's life-giving.
It's life-giving. And the research was overwhelming. Leaders, the best leaders for thousands of years have built margin into their calendars. Now, I was sharing this with a group. I mean, the book's not been out long, so I've only shared this with a few groups, but somebody said, I don't have time for a vacation. And I said, well, that's another topic for another day. I said, I'm not even talking about that. He said, well, you said I need margin. I said, I'm talking about margin as a leadership discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And he kind of looked at me funny, and I thought, I guess I need to define that. And I said, when do you have time set aside specifically to reflect,
Yes.
to assess, to think, to create, and to plan? And he kind of looked at me like I had three heads. And I said, how can you do your job as a leader without time to reflect, to assess, to think, to create, and to plan? I said, if you're not doing those things, do you think your team is doing those things? And I said, and if you're in quicksand, I might recommend respectfully, the very first thing you should reflect, assess, think, create, and plan about is how you can get out of the quicksand. But if you don't have time for that, I said, the time I'm talking about and how I would suggest that a leader use margin, it's not to solve the problems you can solve standing in the shower or driving to work. Those are nuisances and they need to be solved. But we're talking about complex and complicated issues about today and tomorrow. And margin is our time machine, because when we enter margin, we can look to the past to see what we can learn, and we can look to the future that we're supposedly the architects of. How do you design something if you don't actually have time to think about it, right? And apply those lessons from the past. Now, again, I could go on, but let me kind of land this by saying this is not as crazy as it sounds. Harvard just finished a 12-year study of how CEOs use their time. Now, I know a lot of men and women on this call are probably not CEOs, but think about it for a minute. Most of us would agree that the role of a CEO is very demanding and it's very complex. In fact, it's more demanding and complex than what I do, and it's more demanding and complex than what most of you do. 12-year study, they found that those women and men in a typical work week spend 28% of their time alone. Let me let that set in for a second. They're spending almost 30% of their time alone. You go, wow, they're pretty busy people. How do they do that? Well, they believe that they have to have time to reflect, to assess, to think, to create, and plan. Now, somebody would say to me, well, how much time do I need? I have no idea how much time you need. But I'd say this, the bigger your dreams, the bigger your goals, the bigger your challenges, the more time you need in margin. So my encouragement to everybody listening to this call is, if you've never incorporated the discipline of margin into your life as a leader, try to find 2 hours next week. I don't know if that's the right number. You might need 1 hour. You might need 2 days. Find 2 hours and put a meeting on your calendar, and it says meeting with me.
Yes.
And when somebody wants that time, you say, oh, I'm sorry, I've already got a meeting. And you find some other time for them or push them to the next week. You need to find time to plot your escape. That'll be your first project. Yes. How do I get out of this quicksand? And margin is a step. I know it sounds crazy, but you will find it life-giving for sure.
Well, and I'm going to tell you why I used that phrase very specifically. So if anyone has, and the statistics say that 1 out of 8 women will have a breast cancer experience in their lifetime. And just in 2022, we're going to have over 330 some odd thousand diagnoses of invasive breast cancer. And I say this very specifically because when they go to take cancer out, regardless of where it is, what they take around that is margin. That's the medical term. They're trying to create the clear space that takes away not only the mutated cells that are killing us, but that other healthy tissue, to create space to assure that we're not going to get it again. Margin is what we invest in to give us the insight to, create the life, the work in the way that we're seeking to have it. And I tie it back to this idea of margin medically, because if we don't carve that space out for ourselves, then we are allowing for the chance that, they don't get it all.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And so there's this idea of margin to me that goes well past it. One of the other quotes before we move on to fueling curiosity that I really loved that you shared was TD Jakes around, if a leader is in a sustained period of stress and pressure, he or she doesn't have the proper structure. And so this idea of growing capacity, if we're in the thick of things, if we're in the quicksand, then we have to examine, and we need to take that margin, and we need to take the time to think about, what is it about how we've designed our life and work and how we've designed our organizations that keep either just ourselves or ourselves and our team mired in a way that we can't be as effective and have the impact that we really seek to have in our life and work. So I really appreciated that particular quote, and we can come back to that. I know we're going to move into fuel curiosity, and I have to confess that the minute I saw that, one of my favorite books on that includes curiosity is Michael Gelb's How to Think Like Leonardo da Vinci. And so,
love that book.
Well, as soon as I saw that, I'm like, oh, yes, this is going to be a great section in the book, because I'm just a really big proponent that we have all of these ways to expand our thinking and to be curious. And there's tools and methods and opportunities for us to employ to counteract the inertia of our brain that says, oh, no, just stay the same. It's much more comfortable to stay the same. And it's like, no, we have to get past that. So tell us a bit about fuel curiosity.
Well, I share your passion for this topic, and I think it's a real opportunity for humans at large. It's a necessity for leaders that really want to scale their impact. And there are any number of strategies and tactics. We outline some in the book. Again, let me mention just a couple. One is that we devoted an entire chapter to this topic. It's entitled Ask, Don't Tell. The best leaders ask the best questions. And I would say they ask more questions. And so I just think that is a fantastic opportunity. I tell the story in the book of Jim Collins of Good to Great, Built to Last fame. He's spoken at our organization on several occasions. And he challenged all of our folks to double their question to statement ratio. And while we were processing that, he said, and double it again. It's like, whoa. It's like, he said, all good things happen when leaders are asking questions. You're going to learn something. The people you're asking questions of are going to learn something. It demonstrates humility and an openness to learn and grow, and on and on and on and on. And so it's just, it is a very simple thing to do that has disproportionate value. And so I just encourage leaders to start collecting questions and put them in your bag. And when you're in a situation, try one out, and maybe it gives you exactly what you're looking for. Maybe it doesn't. Try a different question. And keep at least mental notes as to which questions work best in which situations. And you'll have some go-to questions. I'll give you one tactical and tangible example, because I think it's the question I ask most often. Okay. And I would say on a good day, I ask it throughout the day. And it is specifically, what are we trying to accomplish? Or what am I trying to accomplish? Because sometimes I'll ask it of a team. Sometimes I ask it of myself. And I want to ask it before I send an email, I want to ask it before I send a text. I want to ask it before I jump on a call. In a meeting, I want to ask it for every agenda item. If somebody doesn't tell me in the first 60 seconds why we're about to have this particular hour devoted to this topic, I'm going to raise my hand and say, I've got a process question. Specifically, what are we trying to accomplish in the next 60 minutes? And so that's really only an illustration that you can end up with some go-to questions that'll keep you focused and the people you serve very, very focused on outcomes. And so I've got lots and lots and lots of questions. The book contains about 600 questions.
There were a wealth. I loved that.
About 600 questions. Because again, I think I can add more value as a leader if I'll ask better questions. So that was one more tactic. And in the book, we call it talk with strangers. It's this idea of learning from others. And it's just a great strategy to expand your world as a leader and to give you more input from which you can actually create the future that you're trying to create. And so, again, individual strategies and tactics in the book on how to do that. But those are a couple of things that come to mind that I think will help leaders maintain that relevance and vitality in a world that's changing faster and faster and faster.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So then we move from this idea of fueling curiosity into creating change.
Right.
And I agree with you that a lot of times leaders, and I do not like to say, there's good leaders. Like we all have the opportunity to be a leader. And sometimes we do better at it than other times. But this concept of, not embracing change for the value it brings us. I mean, life and the world around us changes all the time. Our supply chain through the pandemic was, hello, big surprise. You're not going to be able to find toilet paper that you thought you'd never, ever in your lifetime not be able to go down to the grocery store and get such a simple staple item, right? And so we have to adapt and change in order for, and I don't like the word survive. I like thrive in the world we have today. How do we thrive and help others to embrace life and living and leadership? So talk to us about some of the things that people can do as leaders to create positive change.
Yeah, just give you a couple, because much of this is, I think it could fall in the category of the blinding flash of the obvious, right? Particularly if you embrace this idea that this is actually what you're paid to do. So as we began to think about how do we unpack this, we said you really need to have a combination of a growth mindset and an internal locus of control, meaning you've got to believe that you can actually learn and grow and change yourself, which will enable you to create a different future. If you have an external locus of control, then you're probably waiting on things to happen to you versus initiating those. And so we talk about in the book some ways that you can cultivate both of those. And then the next thing, once you've got your mindset right, like, okay, I can learn and grow and I can affect the future, you've got to figure out what is it you're trying to build. I think in the book, we use the language, you've got to see the unseen. This is the magic and mystery of leadership. We're actually called upon to see a future that does not exist and rally others to make it a reality. So if you believe you can, but you've got no destination, then you can't get excited about change, and people can't get excited about following you if they think your change is just marching in circles. It's like, where are we trying to go? What are we trying to accomplish? What are we trying to achieve? Why does it matter? Why is it relevant? What are the consequences of not changing? You've got to paint that picture for people. And then the last piece that I'll reference here is you need to use the tools you've already got. Now, that's not to say I'm opposed to leaders learning new tools, but virtually every leader I know has enough already in their toolbox to create positive, sustainable change. If you take
There's
vision,
that quote. I'm going to interrupt you. That quote from Hagrid, Harry, you're a wizard.
Harry,
Right?
you're a wizard.
You
You've
have
already,
the ability.
you've got this. You've got this. You can use vision. You can use teams. You can use measurement. You can use accountability. You can use recognition. You can use Six Sigma, which I know you're a black belt. You can use all kinds of things. Once you make the choice to create change, you can use brainstorming. You can make your own list, TQM, lean. I mean, you got all kind of stuff, but it's predicated on a choice that as a leader, I am going to do my very best to create change. Oh, and by the way, here's what that change looks like. Here's where we're trying to go. And then you bring those resources to bear. So that's the fourth choice. And that's where the rubber hits the road. I don't know that it's more important than the others, but it is the last domino for you to actually scale your impact.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I think change, sometimes we don't scale your impact.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we just don't create a big enough vision. Right. I loved that the conversation and the writing in the book about, well, what would have to be true in your future to, change the world, right? What 10 years from now to have changed the world in some way, what would have to be true? And so, encouraging our leaders to think really broadly about what's possible is an important component of this idea of now you can choose. You don't, that's not impossible. It's only impossible if we don't make any effort towards it, right? And yet another quote about impossibility, and I think I'd have to go through a few pages to find it. I know I highlighted it, but the idea is that, we can be those people who change the world. We just have to get out there and do it. Like we have to take action, have broad vision, be creative thinkers, grow all of these pieces, put them together, and then be accountable, hold ourselves accountable, have other people to hold ourselves accountable and do. Right.
So let me say a quick word there. I spoke to a group just recently and somebody summarized it really well, just like you did. But they added one more thing. They said, that sounds hard. That sounds like hard work. And I said, that's what you signed up for. I mean, leadership's hard work. I mean, there are other hard jobs in the world. I mean, I got that. I'm not saying it's the hardest job in the world, but you didn't sign up for an easy job. And if you think doing this well is hard, it's a whole lot harder from the quicksand.
Yes.
So you're going to make it easier, not easy. Leadership is hard. Everything you just said is like, wow, that sounds like a lot of work. It is a lot of work. And that's what you signed up for. So there are some leaders that are in the wrong role, and that's fine too. No shame in that. Everybody's not a leader. Everybody doesn't want to be a leader. So find something that is less taxing. Find something that is less demanding. No shame in that. But if you decide to be a leader, you're paid for hard. Now, doable hard, not destructive hard. See, I think the quicksand is the destructive hard.
Yes.
But it's hard to do this, and it's hard to do it well. So just thought I'd just bring a little reality check.
Yeah, that was a good inclusion. I like that. One of the things that you've done, and I'm going to stray just a moment away from smart leadership because I really enjoy smart leadership, but you've also written using this business fable format. And I really resonated with that simply because I'm a storyteller. And I feel like we learn a lot when we share our stories and hear other people share their stories, and we guard against that other one, the story we tell ourselves, right? So, but the business fable to me is a really valuable tool. Would you take a minute to contrast the idea of this more how to and direct learning versus how we learn through story?
Yeah, fantastic question. So this has been a progressive revelation for me, and I'm not assuming this answer will apply universally, but it's a little bit of a byproduct of the genre. So
Mhm.
as I was writing fables, my publisher in the beginning, they had to tell me this a lot less over the years, is I wrote one of my very first books and they made me take about 75% of the content out because they said, if you want to destroy a fable, you burden it with a lot of tactics. They said, you're telling a story, you're introducing an idea. They said, you're not creating a field guide. Well, okay. I mean, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. If you put all the tactics in a story, it's probably very tedious, particularly if you're trying to do a short story. And so we started creating field guides because I meet leaders every day who want and need the tactics. And it's not that they couldn't even figure some of these things out themselves. They don't have the time and energy. They're trying to say, if the answers are already known, just tell me. And it's no reflection on their leadership. You might even say it's wisdom on their part. I'd rather you tell me than have to go figure it out because it took you years to discover some of this stuff. So just tell me. And so we went down this path for almost 20 years of creating field guides. And I think they're really good, right? As I would. Here's the fundamental problem. 98% or more of the leaders in the world who bought the books never saw the field guides.
Wow.
So they didn't have the tactics. And so I have a new publisher who said, hey, let's do a traditional book. And I said, I don't know if I can do a traditional book or not. And he said, well, why don't you try it? I said, okay, we'll call it an experiment. And I said, but I've got a question. If I do a traditional book, I'm assuming I can include tactics. And he said, all you want. Well, Smart Leadership is probably got 160 pages of tactics.
Yes.
It's just different. There are leaders that probably prefer a story, but my hunch is a lot of them are left going, that was cool. I understand that concept. I wonder what I should do next.
What's my first step? What's my first step to get me out the door?
Exactly.
And then how do I know I've crossed the finish line? Even if it's a moving target, how do I know that I can recognize where the threshold is, right? So, yeah.
So the fundamental difference is this Smart Leadership is a book that is, it's based in principle, but it's got hundreds of individual practices.
Yes.
So that's the difference between this book and the previous books.
Awesome. Awesome. So I'd say to you, what's next? But I happen to know a little bit about what's next because you put a post on LinkedIn. I think I also saw it, on Twitter and some other spaces as well. And that is that you gave us a teaser for your next book on culture. So I don't want to take away from Smart Leadership, but tell us a little bit about what's coming after folks read Smart Leadership and they begin that one.
Okay. Great. So this will go full circle back to where we started this conversation. My team and I are always trying to figure out current and near-term needs of leaders. And we feel like a question that has come to the surface for a lot of leaders is the question of culture, particularly in a post-pandemic world. I have had more leaders over the last 2 years who wanted to talk about culture. Some of those vision-driven, some fear-driven, some telling me their culture has been destroyed by COVID, others saying that to their delight, their culture is stronger. We've got leaders asking, how do we create the culture we want post-pandemic? And so my team has been working on this for, 2 years, I guess. And we did a global survey with folks in 10 countries, leaders, senior leaders, mid-level leaders, and frontline people, because we're trying to figure out what is universally true about culture in an organizational setting.
Mhm.
And then how do we equip leaders to use those insights to build the culture that they want to build. And so we're excited about that. That book will come out in 11 months. It'll be out in March.
Okay.
I'll go ahead and give you the big idea, which is not going to help anybody, but I'll just tell you, I mean, there's a lot underneath this. Leaders animate culture.
Yes.
Leaders animate
Yes.
culture.
They
And
absolutely do.
globally, we found that leaders agree with that. Maybe not that exact language. That's kind of our summary, but leaders around the world will tell you that it is critically important. 72%, as I recall, say it's the most important driver of organizational performance. The gap is that most leaders aren't working on their culture consciously and purposefully. And so
I agree.
we've got to encourage them, and we've got to make it approachable, because particularly senior leaders, they're very, very busy. And so we want to say, what's the minimum level of involvement that will yield the culture that you want? And so we have worked really hard to say, what is the essence of what the leader must do? The organization will need to do a lot of things, and you'll end up deputizing a lot of people, because culture at the end of the day is the collective beliefs and attitudes and opinions and actions of the people. But the leaders are the ones that animate culture. And so that's the path that we're on right now. I mean,
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I think, culture is so critical, because we have things, the classic is your espoused versus your lived values. And so there's things we say our culture is, but then anyone actually experiencing it may find something entirely different. So how do we create that alignment so that people know this is really our culture? We have these expectations, and we have these values that we hold ourselves to, and we actually live those out in our day-to-day life and work. So I think that's important to do.
And I will say this, one of the things that we realized and this again is another like, duh. I mean, but we're trying to call out what's obvious that people seem to have forgotten. If leaders allow that gap, and in many cases, if leaders unwittingly participate in that gap, they are destroying their own leadership influence. People will not trust them. People will not follow them. Now, that didn't mean they're going to quit, which is actually the worst case scenario, right? They're on your payroll, but they're not following your leadership. I mean, you forfeit leadership if you create, participate in, or allow a gap between stated and operational values.
Yes.
It's just a mess. And that's where a lot of organizations find themselves today. So we want to try to help them rectify that.
I like that. I think that's going to be great. Do you have any final thoughts before we close out?
Well, I'll circle back, because I think the choices matter.
Yes.
I really think they matter. And I've dedicated my life to encouraging and equipping leaders, and they need to step up and do an honest assessment. It's like, well, how important are the choices? Well, I'm working on a project right now to take some of my previous work and turn it into graphic novels. And I'm working with a former creative director at Marvel, and it has been a fantastic process. More to come on that in the future. Maybe we can reach a different audience, maybe reach a broader audience. I'd love to take some of these concepts and principles to younger people, maybe give them a 10 or 15 or 20-year head start so they can learn some of these things before they get in the marketplace. So really excited about that. And in my very first face-to-face meeting with my co-author and producer, the Marvel guy, we spent an afternoon doing concepting work. because we actually need to create a story to convey the truth. We're not just drawing pictures to illustrate my existing books. We're creating new stories with characters, with superheroes. And so we're talking about their superpowers. Well, I left that meeting with an aha. It's like every leader has at least one superpower. And it's our ability to make choices. It's there, whether we use it or not. And you might even argue we are using it, right? Whether we're choosing the right path or the wrong path. But our superpower resides in the choices that we make.
Yes.
You know, when we started early, we thought the quicksand was the villain. No, we're the villain.
Mm-hmm.
Because we are making choices to remain in the grips of the quicksand. So my encouragement to leaders is embrace the choices. You touched on it earlier. We can change the world. Well, how do you change the world? It starts with changing your world.
Right.
And from there, who knows what's possible?
That deserves a pause. So
That's all I've got.
I know, that's awesome. That is absolutely awesome. So thank you so much for your time. And I want to thank everyone who has taken the time to listen to the conversation of Mark and I. You can find Smart Leadership and other books of Mark Miller at your favorite retailer or on Amazon. And here's a few ways that you can reach out and connect with Mark. He is available through email, mark@smartleadershipbook.com. His Twitter handle is Mark Miller Leads. He's on LinkedIn. There are a lot of other Mark Millers out there, so be sure to look for the one that says VP at Chick-fil-A. And with one more thank you, I just want to encourage all of you to go forth and do great things. So thank you so much.